kick off with our Distributed Ledger and UPI work groups. Matt Casey and Mark Bessett, come on up. Is Teresa as well? In a little bit. Perfect, thanks.
Okay, this isn't the pain point, so I won't say, hi, I'm Mark Bessett. I use RESO standards. Anyway. Yeah, I'm Mark Bessett. I'm with the CTO with CRMLS, and
hi, I'm Matt Casey with RESO Data. I realized I wore that shirt yesterday. I'm glad I didn't wear it today. That would just been awkward.
We were voluntold to do UPI a while back, so okay, we can.
Click.
And Sam just reminded me to do the RESO antitrust policy. RESO strives to increase competition in the marketplace and will not be a forum for anti-competitive conduct. The RESO antitrust policy governs the activities of RESO and its members, including this meeting. A link to the policy was emailed to you with the meeting agenda. Please consult RESO's counsel if you have any questions about the policy. No hands? Okay, good. All right. Here's the agenda for today. I want to make it really quick. Sam brought up the tool that Josh did for analytics.
Hey, Mark, you want to scoot over? I think your two mics are conflicting.
Oh, I got stereo going? That tool is actually so cool. We use it in the meeting. So we'll be talking about something. We're saying, well, what about people that are using the UPI now? What's this? And you hear these little clickety clacks with someone on the keyboard, and it's Josh, and he's like, oh, and he has the answer for us. Oh, well, 45 MLSs already use that. It looks like there's a penetration of 41% or whatever. He comes up with all the numbers, just bam, like that. So I don't see Josh here, so it's a good thing he didn't have that Oculus. Anyway, it's great work, Josh. Really appreciate that. So we're going to talk really quick about a specification update that we're discussing in the work group. And the progress that we are making on something called the UPI registry, and actually, and some UPI adoption that we have that you guys, it's a deep dive on what you guys saw earlier in the week. But just really quick, before we totally dive in, who does not know what the UPI is or what it stands for or anything about it? Is there anyone here it's okay, because we have such a lot of new faces and a lot of new people, and I just like to have a gauge if people know what it is or if they have no idea. So we have some people. So the UPI is the Universal Property Identifier, and the idea behind this identifier is so that we can coherently identify any property in the entire United States. And in fact, the spec is set up to where it could be anybody internationally as well. And we've been working even with Canada as part of what we're doing, and it's been very successful coming up with this UPI. It's a hierarchical type of number, so that even the U.S. government really uses the UPI. They just don't really know it because we're just using components of what the U.S. government does, and it's a similar approach that we use in Canada. The UPI is actually a required field in the data dictionary. So it's there. We use it throughout RESO, and it's been successful. And we're going to talk some more about the adoption and how we're using it. So, all right, we'll let you talk.
Yeah. So one item that we have under review, don't intend to vote on it today. Still doing a bit of additional thinking in that regard, but the UPI has a component for the sub-county, and currently the spec calls for that to either be populated with a 5-digit ANSI standard when the sub-county actually provides a parcel ID, which we'll talk about that challenge in just a moment. And currently, if it's a county that lacks sub-county, which the majority of counties don't have sub-counties that do parcel IDs, it's an N. And so considering we are a standard group and we're trying to create a standard format, the suggestion was made, instead of having a single character N for no and a 5-character numeric when it's needed, that we should move to a default 5-character 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So that's really the only, from a specification standpoint, that's the only item we currently have under review. As Mark mentioned, the structure has been very well vetted. relatively easy to compile an UPI. So this is one of the few things that probably warrants discussion in terms of structure.
Yeah, and this is super in the weeds because we're assuming that people are looking for that work group level discussion. For those of you that have no idea what we mean by sub county, that hierarchical picture that I was presenting a minute ago, because country and a sub country identifier, meaning in the United States is the state, and then a sub state identifier, which in the United States is the county. And that's 1,300 counties in the United States. That's
Like 3,000 plus.
or 3,100. Sorry, I got a little dyslexic there in my brain. There's over 3,100. Yeah, there's over 3,100 counties, and there's even more than that that are actually spewing out parcel numbers. Right? It's actually some counties, particularly those in the ancient part of the United States on the East Coast, they have townships, and those townships actually give out parcel numbers, and so to account for that, we have the sub-county, and that's an ANSI. Don't blame me that it says sub-county. That's an ANSI thing. And they have a 5-digit number for all these sub-counties. So for those sub-counties that actually dole out the parcel numbers, there's a number. And those counties that don't do it, we use today we use N, and we're talking about just using the zeros because that's really the ANSI standard that's evolved.
And speaking of that, so that's really one of our challenges right now is helping people that are trying to use UPI figure out when they need to populate a sub-county and when they don't. Quick example, and maybe Sean or Brian can tell me if I'm wrong. Sean and Brian, former Tucson, current Tucson, but we're either in Pima or Pinal County, I believe, one of the two. And so if we had the example of the UPI here, it would be US, the FITS code for Arizona, which I don't remember off the top of my head, and then like 021 for Pima. You probably remember.
04015.
Yeah. And then because Pima doesn't have a sub-county that defines parcel IDs, it would be those 5 zeros or the N. As Mark mentioned, that is much more prominent in New England. You get a little bit in the Midwest and in Michigan, a few other odd cases. And the documents that Mark has referenced here, if you ever go to the census's website, you have my condolences. You can find information, it can just be quite painful. And so what we're trying to do is there's a difference between, is there a mechanism to determine it, and is there a friendly, easy to use mechanism to determine it? And so that's something we're talking about in the group. From my perspective, I would start at a county level with a binary, yes or no, the county has it. Majority going to be no, and if it's yes, then we help. That's almost like metadata in terms of what those sub-counties are.
Mm-hmm. And in this data that's here, it actually has an attribute that tells you that ahead of time. So if any of you have used the Builder app, it actually knows it actually presents you with a list of sub-counties when in fact there are sub-counties that have this governmental authority. If there isn't any, it just says, nope, sorry, NA. Don't need any sub-counties. For example, Arizona, it's just county, no sub-counties. All right. Okay, so UPI the easy way, where you don't have to know all this stuff. There's vendors that can provide the UPI for you. CRS is one. Black Knight is someone that we are at CRMLS using to get the UPI out as well. There's another company that I've been working with called Gadberry, and those guys have a phenomenal address set, and they can give you back today they don't give back the UPI. We're working together on that, but they can give back the parcel information, and that's tantamount to having a UPI. So putting UPI in their data set is something that if you call them, I'm sure they will be happy to talk to you. And then we're also talking about doing an address fact in the registry, which we'll talk about the registry. For those of you that don't know what the registry is, I'll give you a little quick primer on that when we get to that. But essentially, you would be able to use the registry to do a translation from an address to a UPI, which is really what we need to do. We've talking in this group about a lot of machinations around making the UPI, but at the end of the day, the consumer or whoever that is, just says, here's the address. And then we go, cool. And we figure out the UPI. We don't give it to anybody that's nobody wants the UPI. No one says, do you know what your UPI is for your home? No one's going to know that. They know their address. And so we'll figure out the UPI. And then that way, anything that's associated with that property, we can leverage. So that's just one model that we might be trying to leverage there. So real quick, registry update here. We've had in the past proof of concepts demonstrated what a registry concept is. And just really quick, what is a registry and what's that concept? So everyone has a car, right? And you guys have a VIN on your car. I don't know how many of you actually looked at the VIN, if you know how the VIN's put together or whatever, but those digits all mean something. They mean the year the car was built. They mean who's the manufacturer. They say whether or not it was manufactured in what country. And then there's a piece of that towards the end where there's like 8 or something digits left, 8 or 9 digits. And that's just the serial number that manufacturer assigned to that particular car. And when you put all those things together, it's very hierarchical, almost exactly like the way the UPI is, very, very similar. And you have an ID. You got there's other things you might identify with your car with, like a license plate and a registration, right? But at the end of the day, that VIN number is what identifies the car. Then you might go, okay, cool, I know what this car is. But what if you want to know things about the car? So you're going to buy a car and you go to a place called Carfax. And Carfax tells you everything there is to know about that car. How are they able to do that? Well, when you go get your oil changed, they have your VIN number and they say, hey, I changed this guy's oil and this was the mileage and this is blah, 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 blah. Or you're in a car accident. Same thing. They put that in that registry. The Carfax is essentially a registry. So now you can know everything that there is to know about this car, including recalls from the manufacturer. The whole gamut of things are available to you at that point. So for the UPI, it's a similar idea, is to have a registry, and the registry gives you all this information about facts that are associated with that particular property. It could be, someone's updating where the flood zones are, and it says, hey, this is in the National Flood Zone ABC, whatever, how they identify those. Someone could have an insurance claim, same thing. They know the UPI because they have the address and it was translated to UPI. We have this spot in a registry for that. That takes providers to provide that data, and there needs to be a demand for that data as well so that people will want to be able to consume it. That's just to catch everybody up to speed, that's what it is. Boy, it sounds really dry, doesn't it? This whole thing sounds very...
Ken, it's riveting.
It's riveting, okay. Keeps me up at night. So that's what we're kind of working towards. One of the things that I've gotten buy-in from Bright and MRED as well to start contributing our facts to a registry. And part of that is because it's very useful to us as MLSs, and we want to start providing a level of skin in the game, number one. Number two, build up some demand so that we can have more people be interested in making the registry. The DL Workgroup, who's coming up right after this, Mark Leswing, for those of you guys that know Mark, he built a distributed ledger implementation of a registry. Quite compelling. If you've seen that deck that he's done, it's quite compelling. So we're looking for ways to do production ready. We're trying to evaluate that. We've had a couple of other vendors that have come to us and said, hey, we think we want to do that too. Can we find out more about what we need to do for a registry? So we're working with those guys as well. Otherwise, we're still kind of updating that spec to make based on these proof of concepts and what comes out of them. We want to make sure that we are, going to develop this thing, the production ready one, with all that knowledge of having some kind of implementation, identifying the costs and logistics, that type of thing. Any questions on the registry? This could be a little bit of a forum. It's okay. We have some time for that. So, okay. Is there a question? UPIs never go away.
He asked how you manage the situations where parcels change. So if you have a split or a merge, essentially.
So it's a very good question. And the idea here is that if in 1937 this was the parcel number, okay, there's the consolidation model, right? So then later on, someone buys that whole thing out. They put a giant mall in place. So they get all these parcels, and then they clear all those out, and then there'll be a new parcel. And that's exactly correct. The UPI doesn't care about any of that. The UPI just talks about the fact that there at least was a parcel or there is a parcel. Doesn't matter time-wise. The registry is where you can tie all those things together. So if you say, hey, this is a parcel, and you put another fact out there that says, hey, that parcel is my parent. So if you think of the legacy of a parcel, the lineage of a parcel, you can say, that's my parent. And or this parcel bore out these many parcels. Maybe a parcel was split into 100 other parcels. So having the registry gives you insight into that kind of lineage. The UPI itself, not designed to tell you the history. It's just an identifier.
Moment in time.
Moment in time. Thank you. Any other questions on the registry or the UPI? So thank you. Catherine's asking, how can we make this compelling, or is it, how are we going to make this something where the MLSs would use this, and we could therefore provide some value back to vendors, consumers, people that are going to, have value for this information. And just for the record, I did not plant Catherine in the audience for that, but that's a super good question, and that's exactly why the registry is there. So the registry is designed to be a mechanism so that when we have an address or we have whatever it is, and we whatever way we go to get that UPI, whether we go to a vendor to get the UPI, there's that registry, and the registry can provide us a score back that says, yeah, there's 1,000 facts associated with that, including the address that you're giving me. And what comes back is the ability to say, I have a high degree of confidence that that's actually the correct UPI, and it's not a string of numbers. So that's a use case that's specifically for the UPI. Any other questions? It's also a good segue into what we have next. So we're going to let MLS listings come up here. If anyone saw them at the beginning of the conference, they had a very super compelling discovery that they did with their systems implementing the UPI. And I really wanted to make sure that everyone understands that when they said they had 94% UPI matches on their records, that was for 20 years of data. So to the question before about hey, what about when a UPI changes or a parcel changes? The UPI never changed. The UPIs are immutable, but the reference of a property could have a different UPI, and they went back 20 years and were able to match things at 94%. So we promised a little bit of a deep dive with them so that you guys can ask questions and we can have a little bit of a forum on where the rubber meets the road. So I'm going to invite Joel Allison up here from MLSL, and he's got another deck that we could use, Gary, to go through what his experiences were. Come on this side. Go on.
Thank you, Mark.
The big one to go for.
I'll just chat a little bit until the deck comes up. Great. I'm Joel Allison. Some of you may have been in the main session on Tuesday, and seen Olga and I present our experience. Today, I have a little bit more detail for you about our approach to the implementation, a a few details about some of our mechanisms that may be of interest to practitioners, implementers out there. So I'm just going to dive right in. So Mark already described the UPI as a hierarchical identifier. You see an example right there in our first talking point. The APN is, as you see there, that's incorporated into that final 8 digits or so. But the earlier portion of that, US is the country code. 04 is the ANSI state code for Arizona. 015 would be the county code for Maricopa. So UPI generation, assigning a UPI, requires tax data. You need the parcel number and you need to know the issuing authority for that. MLS listings relied on Realist for our public records data. UPI assignment to a listing requires data matching. So the UPI is immutable and it has a location. There's a number of ways you can go about matching your listings to those UPIs. For us at MLS Listing, we're looking at parcel number equivalents, postal address equivalents, and our experience demonstrates that exact matching is a luxury, not a necessity. You don't have to have perfect matches for your data in order to assign a UPI to a listing. What does that mean? Well, failure is an option. We definitely have about 6% of our listings where for one reason or another, whether it was data quality or maybe incomplete public record data that we're referencing, we weren't able to assign a genuine UPI to a listing. In that case, we privately assign what we've called a synthetic UPI. This is a non-standard lookalike for the UPI. We never publish it. But this allows us to mark listings and say, we're going to get back to you. We're going to come back around, try to reprocess, see if we can, whittle away at that remaining 6% of listings and get our coverage even higher. And of course, with your working with data sets, metrics are always important. You would never assign, an engineer, a QA engineer. You would never ask them to go through 12 million records and check each and every, data item for accuracy. So we have scores to help us, get a sense of how well we're doing. The confidence score is one that we introduced earlier in our process to measure how close was a parcel number match, because we're not doing exact matching on parcel numbers. So a high confidence score might be a perfect verbatim match to the parcel number, or maybe one where there's just formatting differences like missing dashes. Lower confidence scores allow for missing leading zeros in a parcel number. We can still match that up and assign a UPI. The accuracy score came when we were matching up listings to UPIs. And it's an aggregate score of both postal address matching and parcel number matching. And I have a drill down where we'll talk about the formula we use. But it helps us say, yeah, we've assigned UPIs, but some of these were partial matches. And it also helps us drill in on corner cases. And so that was very important during implementation to help us figure out what we needed to work on next. Where was the next tranche of successful UPI assignments going to come from? And as I'm going through this presentation, as Mark said, this can be an interactive session. If there's a particular talking point you're particularly interested in, just shout it out. I don't mind. This graphic was presented on Tuesday, the iterative approach we took, and I'll go into more detail. But in generation 1, it was just our prototype exploration. Generation 2, we recognized that we needed to be using tax data, and so we did. In generation 3, we wanted to get a better sense of whether the UPIs we were assigning strictly based on parcel number were accurate. So we introduced address matching as well as sort of a cross-check or a sanity check. Our iterations were guided by use cases. So our generation 1 implementation, the use case was research, right? Understanding the UPI specification, understanding whether the data we have in the MLS is sufficient to generate UPIs. So, going through this, it was for research. We built UPIs based on the parcel number in the listings. Now, Mark and And Matt could have told me right off the bat that that was a mistake, but we learned that for ourselves. So we didn't apply this to an entire 20-year data set. We were working with, our own service area. So it was a sampling from California counties in our service area. We were using very naive pattern matching to say, oh, this looks like a good, proper, parcel number in the listing. Let's go ahead and use that. And so we would rule out parcel numbers that were, new or under construction, or all nines, or all zeros, things like that. The success metric was just purely manual inspection. We would assign it, and then we would look through tables and tables worth of rows and see if it looked correct. And of course, we found many problems. There's inconsistent parcel numbers and formats in the data, incomplete data in the listings. We had situations where a UPI would get generated on the parcel number. We could prove that it was the wrong UPI just by manually saying, what's the address for this thing, and oh, that's not right. And of course, we had no quantifiable success metrics. We didn't really know for the entire set we were working with. We were just spot checking. So again, use cases. In generation 2, we said, okay, what we really want to do is deduplicate our listings. MLS Listings runs a reporting service, and we aggregate listings, and we slice and dice the data and generate reports on sales trends and things like that. It's important when we're working with that data warehouse that we don't have duplicate listings. Otherwise, we're reporting too many sales for things like that. So that use case, that data warehouse spans about the most recent 3 years of data. We're not going back 20 years yet. We were linking the UPIs to the listings using our first iteration of a relaxed parcel number matching mechanism. And we had our confidence score at this point. So if it was a perfect match, we had a confidence score of 100. If it was a less perfect match, it ranged down from there. The metric is, a percentage expressed in whole numbers, nothing too fancy. So what problems did we run into in our generation 2? Well, matching tax records to our listings only using the parcel number, we still got it wrong sometimes. Because if the listing doesn't really have an accurate parcel number, if a listing agent working in that neighborhood maybe cloned the listing as a starting point and then carried it forward, you could imagine some data could get duplicated and not really be the right thing. So we ran into those sorts of problems when we were only doing parcel matching. So in this iteration, what were the innovations? We had a way to measure our success, and we introduced partial matching so we could link our listings to UPIs that were generated correctly from tax data. In generation 3, we had another use case that we were exploring. This was unifying our listing history. So, each listing typically has 3 or 4 history events. If it was a straightforward sale, it comes on as a new listing, it goes from active to pending, pending to sold, and so on and so forth. Now, we aggregate data with CRMLS, with other MLSs in our Northern California region. And when we say unifying history, we want to take a history record that we receive from MetroList in the Sacramento area, and maybe another listing a few years later that was entered in our own MLS system. We'd like to present a coherent, complete view of that listing history. We used UPIs to create that correlation between those listings and then pull together those history records. That's the use case. UPI is still based on parcel numbers and tax data, as it should be. The data set at this point goes back to 2000 for the aggregated data share that we have in California with our partners. We assign UPIs to listings not only by parcel number, but also by address. So now we have an entire, another opportunity to get a UPI assigned to the listing, even if the listing itself didn't contain an accurate parcel number. We needed a new success metric because now we're mixing and matching in a new kind of way. That's our accuracy score, and I have a drill down on that, but it's a combination of address matches and postal parcel number matches. What are the problems in generation 3? Well, we've done okay. we've still got that 6% to go, and as a developer and engineer, I'm looking at that remaining 6%. I'm glad that some people are, I think 94 is pretty good. But we'd like to keep going. We can't overcome right now every observed data problem. If we have, a number of address fields and, address elements are combined in fields that we didn't expect them to be. We don't parse every possible combination of those corner cases. We may never if the return on investment isn't good enough.
So Joel, what if you had the UPI entered with the listing instead of doing it the other way around, where you're saying, oh, I've got these listings, now I have to figure out the UPI because I want to do some of these cool things like deduplication. The use cases, there's a lot of other use cases, by the way. Joel just talked about the few that were really impacting all the MLSs, but hypothetically, if you weren't doing it forensically, and the UPI came to you as part of the listing already, well, how would you feel about that?
So I can talk about our listing entry system. We auto-populate any number of fields of the record from tax data. We already use tax information to fill in what we hope is the correct parcel number, along with other unchanging attributes of that property, and incorporate that into the listing every time that house is up for sale. A tax vendor like CRS and the others that you mentioned that provide the UPI in the tax record, we could auto-populate that at the time of listing entry with a high degree of confidence. So any public records provider, any vendor that's providing that information, make it part of your listing entry. That's a very straightforward and natural thing to do, I think.
So perhaps you have an address and you can't get the UPI. You go, Or you have a parcel number that's entered and you can't find a UPI that represents that parcel number at the same time it represents its address. And so immediately, as a data quality measure, you can say, look, something's wrong. Something doesn't add up. Let's create a compliance case or create a case where someone can go look at that and find out why these things all don't match up. So it's a bit of a checksum. So at that point in time, because right now, if someone enters an address, how do you know it's a bad address?
We don't, Mark.
We don't know. And so we can say, well, if they don't match, does that mean I have a bad address, or do I have a bad parcel number? And if you look at the parcel number and it says 99999, you go, yeah, it's probably the parcel number. But if it could have an address and a parcel number, and think of a checksum, how valuable a checksum would be for some fields that we have in the MLS. I think it's huge. I think use cases here haven't even been explored. So if we have those as part of it, so I don't know if anyone here saw the showing hub thing that we're working on across, to facilitate showings in different MLSs. One of the things we put right in that spec was, hey, we want to know the property, because it's no good if someone has got a listing in this MLS and a listing in that MLS, and there's a calendar over here and a calendar over there. We don't want lots of calendars. It really should be aligned with the property. The property is where a showing would be made and where the calendar would be held, so that there's no overlap of appointments if the agent doesn't want any. But having this property ID, independent of listings, again, turns into something that's no other way would we really be able to do that. Without a bunch of matching for every single listing. So what you're doing for one MLS, now you're going to do it for multiple MLSs just to find out if it's the same property, because somebody wants an appointment at 5:30. It won't work.
So just to wrap up on these bits, in generation 3 of our implementation, we introduced this accuracy score to improve how we measure our success. We introduced address matching as a cross-check for parcel matching. We created a placeholder, synthetic UPIs, that we know when we need to come back and revisit something, reprocess something. And I haven't mentioned it, but we have a UPI reference table. So this is our local cache of UPIs that is for our listings. We're not trying to create a registry or a repository of UPIs for everyone. This is for our own internal use for efficiencies.
So the immediate use case, as you do this, you go, what we really need is a registry.
Nothing
And so
like
you-
a shameless plug.
You're welcome.
No, I think it was a natural conclusion for you
Yeah.
guys. So
So a few essentials then about our implementation in its current state. This is a pure database implementation. We were able to do all of the logic for generating UPIs as stored procedures, functions, SQL jobs using Microsoft SQL Server. Our solution is software agnostic, essentially. It's all in the back end. And since we're working very closely with data, a relational database is a very natural engine to do that processing. We think that it was a good choice. But it might not be the same choice that others would make, especially as you start integrating with other external vendors and systems. You may find that web APIs and distributed registries and things like that are more appropriate components of a solution. We have a universal property reference, UPI reference table. We keep the UPI, we keep the normalized form of the address that we have for that, the parcel number exactly as formatted in public records, things like that. The synthetic UPI, I offer an example here. The two big differences is that X is normally where the sub-county code would. In current specification, that's N. In the portion that's under discussion, it would be 5 zeros. We put an X there. This is experimental or extension. It's not part of the standard. The next 10 digits that you see there are an internally generated sequence number, not a real parcel number. So this is absolutely not a legitimate UPI. We use it, it's for internal use only. We never publish it. But as I've said, this is our second chance. We have confidence score, accuracy score, relaxed equivalence tests. UPI metrics are maintained in real time. So when we enter a new listing, and a new listing gets tied to a UPI, the accuracy score for that UPI now encompasses that new listing. If our accuracy scores were to decrease in aggregate over time, we might have to look at our real-time processing and make sure that we don't have bugs in there. And we have continuous reprocessing. We are with database triggers. When a new listing comes in, we immediately start the work to assign a UPI to that listing. So that UPI is assigned very, very shortly, minutes or seconds after the listing enters the system.
assuming the auto pop didn't catch it to start with, right? You said
Well,
that auto
we
pop
don't
issue.
we don't auto pop UPI from tax records right now in listing management, but that would be a suitable solution moving forward. But as you said, a lot of our UPI work was forensic in nature. We're going back to a historical data set. So that was where we started. This is our synthetic UPI drill down. I break apart the components of the UPI and tell you where we diverge. I think the most interesting point here might be that bottom bullet. This is a discrete example of why we generated a synthetic UPI. The parcel number was all 9s for this particular listing. So any person looking at that listing could clearly recognize that this isn't really probably a legitimate parcel number. And the address was misspelled. So Rachel, the E and the A were switched around. What this meant in our process anyway is that when we attempted to use this address to look up the tax record, we didn't find a tax record. And since the parcel number itself wasn't valid, neither one of our two methods of matching were successful. So we assigned a UPI, and as I was looking at synthetic UPIs as part of our debugging and so forth, I came across this one and thought it was a perfect example to illustrate why we have them. Yeah, any questions on that? It's an implementation detail for us. It's not important to the standard.
Is there any questions? I mean, hopefully we can kind of engage. Yeah, please.
What if information listing was looking legitimate, we assume it's legitimate, and not have the parcel number would not have all 9s, have 1, 3, 5, 7, but actually would be erroneous parcel number. All the data would be garbage. Would you still generate a UPI and assume that this is a legitimate UPI?
So it's a two-step dance, right? Oh, sorry. Can you guys give a good summary there?
I think I can repeat it. So he was essentially asking if you're taking information from the listing that looks legitimate, so it's not a obvious 999 type parcel, would you still build the UPI? And if so, how would you have any confidence? I think that was it.
Yep. So the UPI is a two-step dance, right? The first step is to, generate the UPI based on public records, right? Reliable information from the taxing authority for that. You can generate UPIs as often as you want. The real trick is matching up the listings to those UPIs, right? So that's the second stage, the data matching. If we're not able to match by parcel number or address, it could be because the data is incorrect. And so if it's an active listing, maybe the listing agent would be interested in making a data correction. Because of real-time processing, we would pick that up automatically. So it doesn't require any other intervention. Just fix the data in the listing and you'll get a match. In historical records, it requires someone like me or somebody who's looking at data quality to go back and say, can we reasonably run address correction across all of our listings using US Postal Service data? Sure, you could do that. And then when you go through the process again of assigning a UPI by address, you'll have better success because you've cleaned up your data.
But I mean, it will not happen because there's a lot of processes.
So that's a good point too. He's saying that there are still a lot of listings where the parcel number simply isn't available yet, new construction, things like that.
So even parcel number is available, has been available since 19th century, but there isn't street address.
Okay, so a location that has a parcel number but no street address. So we don't rely strictly on one or the other. If we can match by parcel number, we'll do it. If we can match by address, we'll do it. And we'll know if it's a partial match. We are tracking that for ourselves. If we can't match by either method, then for us right now, we give up. Some people have suggested that if you had latitude and longitude, you could do geo-searches and try to match up that way.
You can totally do a geo search actually if you had all the parcel boundaries. You can say which one it intersects with. But the key here really isn't finding the UPI. So finding the UPI is not necessarily the objective. The objective is to find out when the data in the listing is not right. It is incorrect. I mean, and I can tell you I've found so many listings where it says it's in this zip code. And we go, well, it can't really be in that zip code because you're saying the geolocation's here. Or we do the address, we come up with a parcel. That parcel from a UPI, we get a parcel. The parcel boundaries, the geolocation is really far away, or still doesn't match the address. So the point is that it's a fabulous way to find out that the listing information is just garbage, and we have to go back to whoever made that listing and say, hey, we don't know where you got some of this info, but it doesn't lining up. And maybe we have suggestions. So, for example, the other thing is that if they say what county it's in, this is a big one. They think it's in county X and it's in county Y. They give you a parcel number. The parcel in the county that they put in just doesn't match up. And the only thing that's wrong with it is that they put the wrong county in there. So some of these things are just finding out what's wrong with this set of data, and why doesn't it all match up? And because everything in it should all match up, and then you've got good quality. So this is just the data quality of any listing. That's really part of what the actual objective is. This is a tool to do that.
So I hope folks who are interested have had a chance to read through the slide. This is our scoring mechanism for parcel number matching. So it's not always an exact match, and if it's not an exact match, we know how close we got. What? How do I back up? Is it?
No, I think you said you got to
We
move along.
want to move on is because
Okay, sure.
If there's specific questions that someone wants to ask right now, we can take them real quick.
I just have one quick question. As far as your 94%, how wide of a net are you growing? I would assume that's kind of doing new construction, and I would guess it's probably residential resale or.
Yeah, residential listings only. One of the next things we'd like to do is continue the project and start covering lots and lands, commercial and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just you're not grossly excluding like new construction.
It's all residential at this moment. Yes.
No, it's totally it's really good, really good. So if you have other questions and you want to be involved and get some more details here, our work group meets on the fourth Wednesday of the month at, I know it's noon Pacific, that's all I know. Yeah.
3 Eastern.
Noon Pacific time. And we want to let the Distributed Ledger, Teresa with the Distributed Ledger Workgroup come up and have her time up here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
You good?
Good morning. Who's excited to talk about blockchain? Said no one ever. So it's great to see everybody. Great to be here. Let's go over what we've been doing since starting up this year. So we wanted to kind of start fresh with the Distributed Ledger Workgroup and just ask people and have a conversation and say, hey, there were some new faces who came into the DL group, and we want to say, hey, why are you here? What's of interest to you? Since Kiowa Island, the world has really blown up about blockchain. It's in the news all the time. So we have renewed interest in this space. For those of us who have been in the group for years, we're like, oh, thank goodness. We've got some interest. So we went back and we said, okay, what is the purpose of this working group? And what we want to accomplish this year is to create things that can be used in application in our businesses, not just for the MLSs, but also for the practitioners as well. So we're asking the group, hey, what can we do for you? What's your interest? What do you need to take back to your associations to really have the thought leadership and show that we're doing things in distributed ledger to be relevant in the industry? Some things that we've come up with are bridging out into other areas, other industries that touch on real estate. So that includes financial markets. You guys know I'm always talking about follow the money, right? So we are now working with capital markets to bring them onto blockchain that touches on the house, mortgage companies, secondary markets, and also title and title insurance. So these are expanding areas where we see the influence of RESO and the UPI and the blockchain standards that we're coming up with. The other thing that we have is interest from other countries. Other countries look toward the United States for leadership. So we see family offices, royal families saying, hey, what is your blockchain protocol? How can we roll this out in our countries? Which is huge. So now we get to bring financial stability, which comes from the infrastructure of our housing market, to the rest of the world, which is huge. So RESO, I think, in the next few years here is going to have way more influence at a global scale than we ever dreamed possible. So that universal property identifier, we have to now truly make universal and global to work in every country. So we'll be working very closely with the UPI group to make sure that works. Also realizing some things as consortia. So antitrust things aside, right? Consortia launched the agent token. How do we make a token for each practitioner? Not just in real estate, but in title and in mortgage. How do we identify all of these people who are contributing data, who have connections into the property itself? So those are some of the things that we're working on. I would like to open up conversation, and there are lots of people in this room who I'd like to know what is on your mind about distributed ledger. What are the concerns? What are you discussing in your boards and your companies? So please ask questions, and would like to incorporate that into our mission for this year. Don't be shy. Okay, if there are no questions. Yes, Catherine.
Who control? Oh, yeah. Okay, so just to repeat the question, what type of blockchain in terms of ownership and type in terms of control, who controls it, who contributes to it, are you thinking would work best?
This is such, I did not ask Catherine to ask this question, but like this is so critical. So actually this last weekend, I personally went into like seeing, this is my own experience, not from the Distributed Ledger Workgroup, right? But I have requests from someone in this audience named Dave Conroy. He says, I want this on a public ledger. I have this request from Berkshire Hathaway, public ledger. And so this weekend I was about to turn the lights on to go from private going to public. And at the last minute, I read this white paper by one of the CEOs who created an NFT private, a white label marketplace. And he saved our butts as an industry because he took me to school on what happens when we take an NFT from a private to a public ledger. So we know with NFTs, they move through something called like a MetaMask wallet, and then they can be bought and sold on any NFT exchange. And when that exchange happens on certain platforms, they can wipe clean all of the royalties, all of the IP, all of the rules, which creates a massive data breach when we're talking about consumer information, things that need to stay private. So for right now, to answer your question, everything I think to continue to be SOC 2 audit protocol, AML, KYC compliant, we have to stay private. We're building it with the mindset saying, okay, eventually this goes onto a public ledger so that we have true interoperability. And I think probably like the next part of your question is what about interoperability? That has been the buzzword since the beginning of blockchain, because the idea is that you're going to have completely distributed nodes that all communicate with each other. And what we're thinking right now is that it's going to be between, like, say, for example, the capital markets or Deep Haven or Blackstone, right? These companies that we're able to exchange information. Eventually, I think what creates the true interoperability are the wallets. So MetaMask is pre-launching the institutional wallet. And that's for hedge funds that are trading NFTs and crypto. And so eventually I envision, here's my vision on this one, is that every MLS has their MetaMask institutional wallet. Every real estate brokerage does. You see where this is going. And so we're able to trade information and data through our institutional wallets. So I think that's where the interoperability comes from, which is really cool. I think that's the first time I've ever seen clarity on how this data starts to talk to each other. Thank you. Dave Conroy.
Hi, Teresa. Quick question. So is the Distributed Ledger Workgroup just looking at today how blockchain could impact listings, or are you getting into things like DeFi and DAOs and other ways that blockchain could impact real estate?
Yes. All of the above. So from an MLS point of view, what we've heard from one of the largest MLSs in the country is, okay, how do we put a link from our MLS? Liz Sturck said this to me on a call, so that's Miami, of course. How do we put a link in the MLS to this database? And she's like, we could even put a field in. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's the hottest thing I've ever heard of, right? Like, because that takes years to implement. And she volunteered that. For me, as you guys know, I'm a practitioner, right? So for me, it goes into the broker notes. Like, oh, by the way, you want to look up the floor plan that's Fannie Mae compliant? Like, just go to this link. So that's how we're thinking to work. It just really baby steps with sharing this data for right now. So the work group, I think it has a lot on its plate. This is rapidly growing to like brokerages, like I mentioned. Like how do they move all their data from their CRMs onto a blockchain that then they can share, that they can tag their properties on a chain. So it's growing rapidly. Thank you.